Hi, my name's Nathan Sweeney. I'm a Cloud Solution Architect at Ingram Micro Cloud, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Azure Site Recovery. So first of all, let's discuss what Azure Site Recovery is. Within your business, you will have a business continuity and DR plan. What Azure Site Recovery does, it gives you the platform to be able to configure and manage your DR procedures. Site Recovery can manage replication for Azure virtual machines, replicating between Azure regions. One thing of note here is that when you're replicating between regions, you also have to pay for egress bandwidth. It also replicates on-premises virtual machines, that's both Hyper-V and VMware, Azure Stack virtual machines, and also physical servers. Something else to mention about physical servers: if you replicate a physical server which is on premises up into Azure, you change that physical server into a virtual machine. So when you replicate back down to your on-premises solution or platform, it has to be a virtualized platform for you to be able to replicate back to. So just bear that in mind if you're using physical servers. So why would you want to actually use Azure Site Recovery? Well, first of all, it's really simple to use. So if you're running Azure to Azure DR scenarios, then you can initiate Azure Site Recovery in the click of a button. If you're running on premises VMware estates, you can install a controller, configure it just like you would using VMware Azure Migrate, configure it, let it communicate with Azure, and it will then start replicating your servers depending on whatever configurations you want to put in place, of course. It allows you to reduce your infrastructure costs. So traditionally you'd have an on-premises production environment which is replicated to a secondary location somewhere. You don't need that secondary location, so that CapEx cost has gone. All you need to do is pay an OpEx cost, which would be your storage to the secondary location within Azure. You minimize downtime depending on how you utilize the software based on your RPOs. It also is a platform for DR for VMware, Hyper-V, physical servers, and also Azure VMs as well. Bearing in mind that even if you're using a public platform, you still need to have a DR plan in place. You can also run it at a workflow level DR scenario. So for example, if you're running a website which has an IIS server and a SQL database attached, then you can run it at that particular level. So you don't have to move the entire server. So why would you want to actually use Azure Site Recovery? Well, first of all, it's really simple to use. So if you're running Azure to Azure DR scenarios, then you can initiate Azure Site Recovery in the click of a button. If you're running on premises VMware estates, you can install a controller, configure it just like you would using VMware Azure Migrate, configure it, let it communicate with Azure, and it will then start replicating your servers depending on whatever configurations you want to put in place, of course. It allows you to reduce your infrastructure costs. So traditionally you'd have an on-premises production environment which is replicated to a secondary location somewhere. You don't need that secondary location, so that CapEx cost has gone. All you need to do is pay an OpEx cost, which would be your storage to the secondary location within Azure. You minimize downtime depending on how you utilize the software based on your RPOs. It also is a platform for DR for VMware, Hyper-V, physical servers, and also Azure VMs as well. Bearing in mind that even if you're using a public platform, you still need to have a DR plan in place. You can also run it at a workflow level DR scenario. So for example, if you're running a website which has an IIS server and a SQL database attached, then you can run it at that particular level. So you don't have to move the entire server. Before we go into a video demonstration, what I would like to show to you is a very simple architecture of how an Azure to Azure site recovery would work. So on the left-hand side, you've got your source environment, which in this instance is in East US. There's two virtual machines which have the site recovery extension available. They're in a subnet and availability set within a VNet. What happens is you've got your data disks that are attached to those virtual machines. What happens is a storage account is created which caches your data, and then that takes the data and sends it across over to the target environment, which in this instance is central US. And as you can see, there's no actual virtual machines in that environment because those virtual machines will not be created until you have completed your failover. So the reason why you wouldn't necessarily automate this process is because sometimes there can be false positives. So you don't want that to be automatically triggered when there isn't actually a DR scenario being initiated.
So here we are in the Azure portal. What we're going to do is, in this demo, we're going to have a look at setting up Azure Site Recovery for a single virtual machine. So what we'll do is we'll click on Resource Groups. We'll go down to the resource group that we want. You'll see in here there's a virtual machine. Just click on that virtual machine. At the moment, it's currently stopped. So let's just hit Start. We'll just let that start and then we'll come back to it in a moment. So this virtual machine is now started, and one thing of note is just to understand where the location of that virtual machine currently is. As you can see, it's been given IP addresses. So let's just go down to Disaster Recovery on the left hand side. So what we're now presented with is the target region. So our source region is UK South, as you saw a moment ago. And now what we need to do is define where we want to replicate that virtual machine to, or should I say the disks associated with that virtual machine. So let's click on Next. So we're going to select North Europe. Then we're going to click on Next. Just have a look at the advanced settings. And then what we're going to be presented with is what kind of subscriptions we want it to be in, resource groups, virtual networks, what kind of availability sets we want to be assigned to that machine, and also what kind of storage settings are we going to associate. So at the moment, if you're using a premium SSD, you can go down to a standard hard drive if you'd like. So you can start to tweak your little cost savings there if you want to. We can have a look at the replication settings, how long the retention policies are going to be, and what recovery services, faults, and also any kind of extension settings if we want Azure Site Recovery to actually do the management of that machine, or are we going to do that on a manual basis. So then it's review and start. So you'd go through, you review the settings that you've just selected, then hit start replication. So I'm just going to hit start, and then that's going to take a few minutes. It's going to initialize the deployment, it's going to start the deployment, and then that'll set up everything for us. And I'll come back in a few minutes and show you that. Okay, so here we are back in that virtual machine. It's started up and we've clicked on disaster recovery. We've configured the DR side of things, and that is now replicating. So let's just click on DR and see the differences. So before we go into this is just the overview pane, and as you can see at the bottom here, the infrastructure view, it shows the virtual machine, the cache storage as per the architecture diagram. It's using Azure Site Recovery in North Europe because you don't want it to be utilised in UK South, because if UK South does fail, then you've not got access to the Azure Site Recovery service to be able to pull that server back up. And then you can see there's a managed disk associated as well. So what we can do from here is we can have a look at the properties, what computer network has been associated, and the disks that are associated as well. We can also perform a test failover. So if we clicked on that, for example, we already know the source location and the target. What we can then do is choose the recovery point. So whichever was the latest recovery point, what network we wanted that to go into as well. And then we could click on OK, and that would perform a test failover for us. What we've also got is the latest recovery points. So you click on this, a new blade will open just to the right hand side here, and it will show you the latest recovery points.
So in today's sessions, what we've covered is what Azure Site Recovery is, why we would actually use it, and also I've shown you, although a very quick whistle stop, of how you would use Azure Site Recovery in the scenario of using Azure to Azure. My name's Nathan Sweeney. Today we've been talking about Azure Site Recovery. If you need anything from me, please feel free to reach out to me. My details are on the screen, and I hope you've enjoyed this.